The official name was the Future Work Initiative. But for anyone with a fully functioning brain cell, it was murder. I remember practicing times tables when the door to our classroom flew open, and in walks the sheriff with a wide smile. He had some super, fun, exciting news for us. So exciting that he used 3 adjectives. Children. The sheriff greeted us with a wide smile. He had a PowerPoint presentation he wanted to show us. The title was punchy, on a bright green background. THEFUTUREKINITIATIV. His assistant, a smartly dressed woman, clicked a button, leading us to the first slide, an enlarged photo of the map of America. The sheriff immediately dived into the presentation. Okay, so how many adults do you think are currently unemployed? Isabella stuck up her hand. 50? I figured I'd guess, raising my arm. 100? 100 billion? Gracie giggled from the back, half of the glass snorting with her. That was a rhetorical question. The sheriff said, right now, about 4 out of 100 people in this country are out of work. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but in reality, it's a very scary statistic. His expression hardened, his eyebrows coming together like little furry caterpillars. He turned to the PowerPoint presentation. However, I am very excited to announce that we will be the very first town to implement the Future Work Initiative, which will help you guys. His grin widened. Get yourselves into work. The classroom filled with groans and stifled laughter. Is he serious? Casper's hand instantly shot up, and I rolled my eyes. The smartest kid in the class always had something to say. The sheriff looked delighted that he was getting some kind of reaction that wasn't 20 pairs of dazed eyes and agape mouths. Yes, young man. The kid with the cartoon hat. Casper's lip curled. He tugged his beanie over his curls, speaking with emphasis. Actually, it's Dragon Ball. Ask your question. Kid. I'm 10 years old, Casper said, an ironic drawl to his tone. I'm not old enough for a job. He folded his arms, leaning back in his chair. Obviously. Me too. Lou waved her arms, scowling. I'm not even in high school yet. I can't get a job. I don't even know how to work. The sheriff's smile was getting a little scary. I'm not talking about now, he told us. I'm talking about the future, when you will be an adult. He gestured for his assistant to continue the PowerPoint, and this time we were looking at a photo of a sad-looking high schooler grasping her diploma to her chest. I remember suddenly feeling nauseous, phantom bugs filling my mouth. Amy didn't get into her favorite college. The sheriff spoke up, gesturing to the screen. So, do you want to guess what she did? When none of us responded, his smile darkened. Amy decided not to get a job, and Amy is not the only one. When teenagers did not get into their ideal college to further their education, they lose their incentive to find a job and get very sad. The next slide displayed an image of a crying man. The sheriff turned to us, his eyes wide. How many of you want to go to college? All of us raised our hands, and I'll never forget the look of disappointment on his face. That's where you're all wrong, he said. Children go to college for leisure. They don't care about the jobs they'll get afterward because there are no jobs for the subjects these people choose to study. This time, he slammed his fist against the board, and half of us nearly jumped out of our chairs. Have you ever seen a job listing for, let's say, French film? No, children attend college to be educated, but they are not educated. They come out brainless, unable to find even the simplest work, and our great country loses its precious workforce. He pointed to Emma. You? What's your favorite food? Emma looked startled, her cheeks going pink. Pizza? Pizza won't exist without someone making it for you, he said. In fact, if the person making your pizza decided to go to college to study ridiculous subjects like science and diseases, when we already know how we get sick and we already know what makes us sick, young lady, our favorite pizza wouldn't exist without that worker. I didn't fully understand the presentation, leaning over my desk to my seatmate. Cayenne. What is he talking about? Cayenne shrugged, a pencil lodged between his teeth, his gaze glued to a stock image photo of a group of smiling children. I don't know, he mumbled, chewing on his pencil. Maybe he wants us to get jobs. The sheriff was quick to shush us. How many of you want to be grown-ups? Every hand shot up. and a proud smile on his mouth twisted my gut. What would you say if I told you the group of you could become adults surly? Isabella squeaked excitedly. They're going to turn us into grown-ups? That's so cool. Well, it's a little more complicated than that. But, yes, I suppose. If you put it that way. Introducing the cut. At the age of 15, you'll lie down on a warm, comfortable table, and in the time it takes to blink just a single blink you'll be 25. No pain. Or mess. No confusion. Just a smooth transition into adulthood. You won't remember the procedure itself. You'll close your eyes as a child, and in a single blink of your eye, you will be 25 years old. No awkward years, and no need for higher education. Everything unnecessary, everything that gets in the way of your development, will be removed. He chuckled. And the best part? You'll wake up ready. Ready to enter the great American workforce. Isn't that wonderful? Casper leaned forward. After a bout of silence, I was pretty sure Isabella had burst into uncontrollable sobs. You're a genius, Casper whispered excitedly, his mouth breaking into a grin. His eyes were eerily glued to the presentation, half-lidded, like he was hypnotized by the current slide. I love it. What? Zach's eyes were wide. He was terrified. Did you not hear what he said? Looking around the class. Most of my classmates had the same sentiments. I'm pretty sure one boy started having a panic attack. Casper, however, was for once sitting up straight in his chair, eagerly waiting for the presentation to continue. I remember my stomach was churning, vomit creeping up my throat in a sar's line. You're serious? I whispered, twisting in my chair to him. Casper had this look on his face, an expression I'll never forget. Like he was relieved at all the troubles in his mind. His insecurities and fears of not being good enough were being lifted from his shoulders. Casper was the smart kid, the boy who wouldn't stop talking about higher education and high school. And yet somehow, all of his ambitions and dreams had been wiped out in one single speech. He was fascinated, and I found myself terrified by the glimmer in his eyes, the light from the board reflecting in his pupils. The boy shrugged, smiling. What? His grin eerily mimicked the sheriff's. I want to be a grown-up. Unsurprisingly, the rest of us thought this man was fucking insane. When he left the room, my classmates erupted into protests. When I stepped inside her house, my mom was actually home. She was in the kitchen, shouting on the phone, and in her hands was a flyer detailing the Future Work Initiative. I was curious, so I read through it. The flyer itself was slick in my clammy hands, smelling of bleach, my nails scratching across each page. I only had to get to Section 3 uniformity, and keeping our children safe, an entire section on the specialized colors we would be wearing to know this thing was actually happening. The bill had passed earlier that morning. Somehow, I kept reading, feeling progressively sicker. When I reached the new parent initiative, making sure our children are fully protected by parents following the initiative, I ran upstairs to my room and buried my head in my pillows. I kept reading, hiding under my blankets, my stomach contorting, bile filling my mouth. Section 4, Cutting Your Child explained. As a parent, we empathize that you are worried for your children's future. We understand. While the cutting process does sound intimidating, it is simply a medical procedure that will protect your child going forward and ensure they live long, prosperous lives and, of course, provide you with the next generation. The cutting process is a quick and easy fix which will take exactly 45 minutes. Using precise neurological and physiological intervention, we extract the child's self, allowing the adult form to emerge fully developed. For your son-daughter, they will not feel time passing, and will seamlessly transition into adulthood. Please be aware, this will not affect your child's neurological development. Once completed, your child will be turned off. This is completely normal, and we ask you to please be patient with your child. For more details on what to expect post-cutting, please refer to Section 5, Aftercare and Integration. Before I could flip over, the flyer was snatched out of my hands. Mom loomed over me, phone pressed to her ear, her eyes raw from crying. She didn't speak to me, instead placing a plate of cookies on my bedside table and kissing my forehead. Mom took the flyer, tore it into two, and dumped it in my trash can. Pack a suitcase, just in case, she told me, before leaving my room. Only the necessities. I understood it was a parent's job to keep their children safe. But I already knew what was going on, and Mom's attempts to shield me from the truth only made me feel useless. Mom spent the next several weeks campaigning and protesting for my rights. For my classmates' rights to an education. I insisted on accompanying her, protesting for my own rights, joining my friends and their parents outside the mayor's office. Mom took me out of school in protest, homeschooling me instead. I never expected things to actually go forward. I was a kid. I stood next to my mother and waved my sign, and in the back of my head, I thought, this won't really happen, right? It's just a misunderstanding, and we'll all go back to school, and this will all be forgotten. But one day, Mom came home from the store crying. She didn't say why, but I overheard her on the phone speaking to Grammy. It's every fucking store, she whispered. They're not letting me buy anything, and they're refusing my card. I need to be part of this fucking new parents' initiative. If I want gas or food, she sighed, running her fingers along the countertop. Yes, I'm going to try to skip town. There's a Walmart in the next one over. Okay. Yes, I promise. It's okay. I've got our passports. I'm not sure how to tell you exactly how my town fell in just a couple of weeks. People started throwing rocks at our windows. I saw Zach with his mother. Zach was wearing the new mandatory color for us. Purple. Purple shirt and purple pants for boys. Purple dress and purple tights for girls. I only had to see the strain in his face, the way he kept tugging at his mother's hand, and me to know he hated his new clothes. I was homeschooled, so I saw everything. I wish I didn't. I think part of me wishes I actually went to school, so I didn't witness my life crumbling around me. I saw the men in black force their way into our house, restraining my screaming mother, taking her purse, passport, and my birth certificate. They also took her phone, laptop, and all of my books from my shelf. As part of the Future Work Initiative, I would only be reading town-mandated books. I was torn from my mother's arms 2 days later, and taken to what used to be the county jail. Instead of holding criminals, it held terrified 10-year-olds. I was thrown into a cell with 4 other kids. We were told, from that moment on, our parents were no longer our parents, and we would be adopted by parents in the new parent initiative. Some kids violently fought back, and were dragged away. I was left with a girl called Chara, who slumped next to me. I remember the feeling of her fingers wrapped around mine, and the dim glow of an overhead bulb. She broke out into sobs that I knew lied. I saw her expression that day during her presentation. She was smiling too. Just like Casper. Well, at least we'll get jobs, she murmured, resting her head on my shoulder. Maddie? I fell asleep, shivering, curled up with Chara. But as quickly as I slipped into slumber, I awoke to a flashlight blinding me. My first instinct was to scream, but then I saw the face behind the light. Mom, get up, honey. She gently pulled me to my feet, wrapping her arms around me. I didn't realize I was crying, until my body was trembling. My arms squeezed around my mother. She smelled like daffodils and her favorite perfume. Mom pulled away, pressing a finger to her lips. We're going to stay with Grammy. All right, she whispered. Mom gestured for Chara to follow, but the girl shuffled back, shaking her head of blonde curls. Chara curled into herself, wrapping her arms around her knees. My mom is a traitor to the town, she whispered. Her eyes were vacant, hollow, her smile unwavered, fingers gripping the material of her dress. Mom thinks she knows what is best for me, but I want to be a part of the Future Work Initiative. Mom's eyes darkened, but she stepped back. Chara, honey, I want you to come with me, and I promise I will keep you safe. Chara lifted her head, settling us with a smile. If you try to take me away, I will start screaming. Mom wanted to save Chara, but I told her not to bother. The girl would take pleasure in me being captured. Mom easily dragged me out of the sheriff's station, and to my surprise, 6 other kids boarded a stolen school bus on the edge of the sidewalk. I didn't ask how she had saved them, promptly ignoring the body of a man slumped on the sidewalk. He's unconscious, Mom said quickly, pulling me onto the bus. I wondered where all of the other guards were. Daniel? Mom was speaking into a phone, sliding into the driver's seat. I've got 15 of them, including my daughter. Yeah, I just need passports for 15 kids. Mom paused, forcing the keys into the ignition. Mom? I pressed my face against the glass of the window, my gaze glued to the man on the sidewalk. Is that man Ed? Sit down. Maddie, was all she said, stamping on the gas. Mom's plan to help us escape on a school bus was equal parts genius and stupid. I mean, a random woman driving a school bus full of fourth graders in the middle of the night? Definitely suspicious. I stayed as still as possible at the back of the bus, knees tucked to my chest, arms wrapped around my backpack. There were 15 of us, but all I really saw were familiar faces in a sea of purple. The ones Mom saved. Cassie was crying, her face buried in her lap. Cayenne was trying to comfort her, but he wasn't doing a very good job. Zach was still standing, his fingers wrapped tightly around a yellow pole as the bus swayed with every turn. I noticed his mandatory purple shirt under a jacket hanging off of him. His eyes were wide, his teeth gritted. Are we there yet? He asked, his voice flying up in octaves when she slammed on the brakes, almost sending him flying. Mom didn't even look back, hands glued to the wheel. As it cast again, she used her warning voice. Sit down, Zach. How do we even know we can trust you? He demanded. He twisted to me, his eyes accusing. Maddie's mom could be leading us right into a trap and back to our parents. Zach, you know that's not true. My mom said softly. I know you're all scared, but I'm going to take you somewhere safe. Where? Zach snapped. Are you taking us to be chopped up? Somewhere safe. Okay, but where? He wailed, his voice breaking. Canada. Canada? He squeaked, almost toppling over. Zach. Mom's tone hardens. I am losing my patience with you. Please sit down. He didn't sit, staying stubbornly upright, letting the bus swing him back and forth. I caught his gaze following each house we passed, his bottom lip wobbling. If I'm sitting down, I can't run away, he said through gritted teeth. In the normal days of our town, he was a teacher's pet, insufferable, but harmless as long as I remembered to finish my homework. Zach was the type of kid who announced at the end of class, what about homework? This Zach was different. I wasn't sure I liked this version of him. I noticed we were passing his parents' house, and he ducked immediately, pressing his hand over his mouth. I watched the teacher's pet crumble, coming apart as we flew past the familiar bright red of his mother's front door. I was too scared to unravel my own body, my knees so tightly pressed to my chest. I thought I was going to suffocate. Zach. Mom's voice was like warm water coming over me. Talk to me. Honey. She spoke softly, coaxing Zach into his seat. He slumped down with a sob, half off of the seat, already ready to run if needed. I hate her, he whispered into his knees, his hands balled into fists. Zach, you know your mother loves you, Mom started to say, before he let out a scream, slamming his fists against the window. Shut up. He spat at my mom through a sob. You don't know what you're talking about. Mom made me wear this stupid shirt, he said, tugging at the material, his lips curling in disgust. And she's going to let them cut me up into little pieces. It's not cutting us up into little pieces. Moron. Kyan grumbled. It's just our brain. No. That's wrong. Cassie whispered. I read the flyer. They're going to cut us up. Then how will we be able to work? Kyan shot back, tugging at his blonde curls. If they cut us up into tiny little pieces, there won't be anything left of us. I thought Mom was going to say something reassuring. That Zach's mother was just scared. But then I saw my mother's fingers tighten around the wheel, her lip curling in disgust. You're right, she said softly. Zach, your mother is brainwashed. Mom twisted around to shoot him a small smile. But I'm going to take you far away from her. All right? You're not going to be scared again. That goes for all of you. My mother spoke up. I'm going to keep you all safe. I want to tell you that my rights ended in a series of events. I want to tell you that we were caught, and my mother was dragged away, screaming. But the reality is, my rights ended with a bang. I thought it was a blown tire, or maybe we had run over a cat. But then the screams slammed into me, agonizing wails that wouldn't leave my head. I was only aware of my mother's body sitting rigid, and the splintered glass of the bus's windscreen. When men and women in black filed onto the bus, yanking us from our seats, I was paralyzed at the back, watching the slow dripping red slide down the windscreen. Mom. I remember diving forwards. I remember screaming for her. But already, I was in a stranger's arms who smelled like shoe polish and grease. I was carried off of the bus, screaming, and when I looked back, my mom wasn't moving. One of the soldiers kicked the heel of his boot into her head, and she slid off of the seat, unmoving, almost like trickling water. The thing about grieving is, I learned it was a long process. It was a drawn-out process. When my grandpappy died, I didn't feel the pain instantly. It was more like a sinking feeling that never really went away. But with Mom, I wasn't allowed to grieve. I didn't have time to grieve. By the time I was fully registering, my mother was dead. I was dressed in a purple dress that stuck to my skin and felt like fire ants. Standing outside my new parents' front door, all man wearing a mask held my hand. And no matter how many times I tugged away, he held tighter. Zach was standing behind me, his eyes unseeing. He kept nudging me. What are we going to do? Maddie, what do we do now? Maddie, please, tell me what we are going to do. I didn't respond. I was thinking about my mother's brains dripping down the bus window. When the door opened, our new mother welcomed us with open arms. She was a big woman with curly hair and a wide smile. Matilda. She wrapped her arms around me, pulling Zach into the embrace. Oh, and you must be Zach. Hello, darlings. I'm so happy to be adding to our little family. Wait until you meet your brother. Zach wriggled out of her arms, tossing me a look. Other, introducing herself as Mrs. H. She led us into a brightly lit kitchen, where a familiar face sat, his head of brown curls buried in a brand new edition of the Future Work Initiative this time. A kid-friendly booklet. Casper. Behind me, I could sense Axe stiffening up. Casper regarded us with a smile, peeking over the booklet. Hello, fellow siblings, he said, his grin widening when Zach mumbled a curse under his breath. I'm glad you're finally joining me on this exciting journey to the Future Work Initiative. He turned the booklet around so we could read a simplified version of the cutting procedure, and his eyes, wide with excitement, were reveling in every word. Trust me, you're going to love it here. I was still numb, still not fully understanding my surroundings. What I did know was that Mrs. H's kitchen smelled like stew, and the bowl of stew in front of my classmate was there 1 minute, and then it was being dumped on Casper's head. Casper didn't move, a slew of gravy and potatoes dripping down his face. That's what the Future Work Initiative helps with. Zach, he spoke calmly, prodding the booklet, reciting every word. It removes violent tendencies, which you clearly have. Leaning back in his chair, he settled us with a smirk. It's not my fault you're expressing violent behavior. Zach definitely proved he had violent behavior that night. We were sent to our rooms with no dessert. I checked the windows in my room. All lots. From that day, I was forced into the Future Work Initiative. School was no longer a thing. Instead of learning, we went to church every day, followed by afternoon cherry picking, helping town elders. Mrs. H assigned me and my brothers to a farm on the edge of town, and admittedly, I kind of enjoyed it. I got to look after the animals, pick and grow fruit, and learn how to work the machinery with the farmers. I think part of me was hyperfixating on anything that wasn't thinking about my mother. When I finished my farm work one night, Zach pulled me into the cornfield, where, to my surprise, he'd fashioned a grave for my mother. I didn't thank him. I accepted the rose he picked out for me, lay it down on the ground, and broke apart in his arms. When I turned 13, Mrs. H surprised me with mandatory classes after dinner. Classes weren't allowed. According to the new rule, educating children in any way was a criminal offense. So when Mrs. H broke out hidden workbooks, piling them in front of us, I realized she was actively educating us. Casper wasn't a fan, obviously, but he had missed actually doing work. He threatened to tell the authorities, until Zach threatened to break his legs. So after dinner, every day, the three of us had 5 hours of school in the basement. Casper refused to join in at first, hiding behind the Future Work Initiative books. But, slowly, he started to shift towards us, at first silently watching me complete a test and trying, multiple times to correct me. And doing it wrong, Casper grumbled, sitting with his knees to his chest. I ignored him, but I could feel his eyes burning holes into my exam paper. Question 3 is simple, and you're supposed to show you're working. He was right. I started to scribble my working, and he let out an exaggerated sigh. Madium my outside emas marthly unjustifiedus. You're killing me. Zach, embedded in his own workbook, finally slammed it down in frustration. He didn't speak, snatching up a blank workbook, scribbling Casper's name on the fronts, and throwing at the boy's head. Harsh. Casper mumbled, but he did open the workbook, grabbing a pen. His eyes flicked to me, lips curling. Just so you know, I'm only doing this because you two are too stupid to do it on your own. Casper started joining us for every lesson. Afterwards, he started doing his own tests, and even requesting more books for him to read. Growing into a teenager, I started to realize my procedure wasn't far away. I was 13 years old, still working the fields, picking fruit, and attending church to pray for forgiveness. Apparently, being semi-educated at the age of 12 was bad. We had to learn our yellow American values. Our priest had been replaced with a man in a black mask. I was getting ready for my SATs in secret. Mrs. H had managed to get her hands on old papers from years before, but it was enough. Zach questioned her, halfway through a pop quiz. What's the point? He said, his pen lodged between his teeth. Zach was boyishly handsome, hiding under thick brown curls. He was also seriously crushing on the guy who delivered our town-mandated newspapers. Why are you helping us with our SATs if we're not going to college? I second that. I spoke up, looking up from my work. You're working with them. Mrs. H sighed, before kneeling on the ground. I tell you this once, and only once, she said softly. Yes, I may very well agree with the Future Work Initiative, but I also stand for children getting a proper education. Her eyes flicked to me. Make no mistake, Matilda, I will be delivering you to the cutting bay. But first, you will be correctly educated, so you can enter the world as fully functioning intelligent adults. But what if we don't want to? Zach spoke with gritted teeth. I nudged him to shut up, but he was already straightening up. Mrs. H, you've been teaching me since I was a kid, and I appreciate that, he whispered. I wouldn't know what the fuck I was doing if you didn't let me continue school. Language. Zach. Sorry. He rolled his eyes. You just said you believe in our rights to be educated, but you're happy sending us to be cut up? Mrs. H didn't speak. Even Casper was silent, gaze glued to his workbook. Casper had changed over the years. I think he'd regained his love for learning, and being a pretentious, know-it-all little shit. There was an ominous silence, before he coughed awkwardly. I believe in the Future Work Initiative, Casper said softly, dragging his pen across the floor. He was cross-legged, a book on his lap. I think it should be a choice. Casper rolled his eyes when Zach balked at him. Maybe. Mrs. H startled us by slamming her own book on the floor. That's enough, she said, but her expression was eerily familiar to my 40th-grade teacher before she abandoned us. She looked hopeless, scared, confused. Mrs. H's tone darkened. If you speak another word, you can forget dessert. We did shut up, but already, I think our new mother was having her own doubts. Still, Zach and I made plans to run. Casper hung around us. I'm not coming with you, he kept insisting, but he never left our side. On the day of the cut, we would attend church, go back to the house, and be escorted by our mother to the cutting bay. Our plan was to sneak out of church and make a run for it. On the day I would be cut, I stuffed my face with pancakes. I was 15 years old. I was supposed to be going to school. I was supposed to have an idea of what I wanted to do with my life. Morning, Zach said, sipping coffee. His prolonged gaze meant he was still ready to run. I gave him a simple jerk of my head, twisting around and pouring my cereal. You two are painfully obvious, Casper grumbled from behind an actual book. But you're coming. Zach breathed to him in passing. Going straight for the cookies. Casper didn't look up from his book. Of course I'm coming. Mrs. H greeted us at breakfast, before dropping the bombshell. There will be a car waiting for you outside in 5 minutes, she said stiffly, tears filling her eyes. I want you, with 0 questions, to get in the back. And do not look back. I didn't know what to say. I hugged her. I cried. Zach and I embraced our mother. And at that moment I really did think we were a family. Casper stood with a curled lip for maybe zero point 0.1 seconds before joining in. Mrs. H told us to pack a bag. There were no hugs goodbye. No tearful thank yous. Though I did promise to contact her once we were out of town. She guarded the door, and when we were ready, ushered us out, down the lawn, and straight into the back of a sleek Range Rover. I jumped in, followed by Zach, and finally, Casper, squeezing himself between the two of us. We were free. I only let out a sigh of relief when we were far away from Mrs. H's house. "You kids all right?" The driver, a youngish-looking man, spoke up after a long silence. I didn't respond. Next to me, Zach was shaking, his hands clasped in his lap. "We're fine," Casper said after nudging me to respond. "It's nothing a little therapy for. I don't know. The rest of our fucking lives won't fix." The driver laughed heartily. "Good. Do you kids mind if I play a little music?" He stabbed the radio on, regardless of our response. I liked the song. I don't know it, but the lyrics stuck with me as I crumpled into rich leather seats, letting my head tip back, my eyes flicker and shut, reveling in the music. "Tell me lies. Tell me sweet little lies. Something. I'm not making plans." I didn't realize I was dozing off until Casper nudged me hard. "Hey," he whispered, and my eyes shot open. "Maddie, something is wrong." Next to me, Zach's head had found my shoulder, but in front of me, something was thick and foggy. I think I laughed, tipping my head back. I felt a panic surge, but my body was already numb. Mrs. H already knew we were going to escape, so in the most gentle, and yet horrific way possible, she was delivering on her earlier words. What a fucking bitch. I don't remember how I got from a car to being strapped down to a hospital bed. There was a bright, clinical light above me. A tube stuck down my throat. "Maddie, sweetie, do we have your consent to begin the procedure?" The voice came from the figure looming over me. I told her, no, and she responded with, "Great. Count down from 20. Maddie, where were my brothers?" I felt my body jerk violently under harsh Velcro straps. "Count for me, sweetheart," the nurse hummed in my ear. I did. I tried. Outside, I could hear thudding footsteps, loud wails. "Let me go." I couldn't grasp the voice. My mind was already unraveling. "Fucking assholes. Let me go." I was partially aware of clinical white gloves hovering over me. I counted backwards from 20. 191,817. 161,514. 131,211. 10. I can only describe it as a flash, like a photo being taken. I blinked once, and those sterile white gloves were covered in blood. I blinked twice, and I was screeching into the tube forced down my throat. 3 times. Matilda, slumped in front of me, spread out on a leather chair, was my boss. Tall, oldish, wearing an odd smile. I was sitting, one leg crossed over the other, in a large office, a perfectly pressed dress, my hair pinned into a ponytail. It really was a blink of an eye. I was an adult. I didn't even feel time passing. I was 25 years old, and I felt 25 years old. "Matilda, is there a problem?" My boss jerked my attention back to him. "No," I said. My voice was deeper. "No, there's no problem." It looked like we were in the middle of a conversation. I stood, holding my hand out for him to shake. His hand was clammy, slimy. "I'm looking forward to working with you, sir, as we are with you." He grinned. "Matilda, as you know, you are very well known here, and all across town. We are very excited for you to be joining us." He was right. Everyone loved me. Well, they loved her. I had a high-salary office job, but I had no idea what I was supposed to be doing. I got a standing ovation when I entered the office, but I was increasingly getting strange looks. Initially, I thought I had something on my face. Colleagues would just stare at me with unnerving smiles that turned my stomach. "Be honest," one of my older colleagues hissed, leaning over my desk. "How much do you remember?" Her words sent my stomach into my throat. I excused myself. running to the bathroom. Her words were like bile filling my mouth. But I didn't puke. I couldn't puke. I went to grab coffee and slammed directly into another colleague. I only saw his crisp white shirt and tie. A blazer hung over the top. And I saw his name tag. "Watch where you're going," a man grumbled, shoving his way past me. It sounded like he had something in his mouth. Instinctively, I grabbed his arm, yanking him back. He choked something up, bending over and spitting it on the floor. The sight sent me into fight or flight. On the ground at our feet was a single strip of raw bacon. Before I could question it, a man scooped it up and dropped it into his mouth, vacant eyes briefly finding mine. "Matilda," he said through a mouthful. "Nice to see you again." He started toward me suddenly, hesitantly, leaning close, his breath tickling my cheek. I was expecting him to speak, maybe tell me he missed me. But instead, he buried his face in my hair, sniffling deeply. I immediately retracted, but I couldn't ignore the sudden twitch in my bones, signaling that he was a threat. The man didn't stop, and I let him. I think part of me enjoyed the way he ran his nose down my neck, inhaling every part of me, until his lips found mine first with hesitance, his entire body jolting back. Before his expression began to soften, I knew them. I knew his slick red lips, razor-sharp teeth scathing the back of my neck, his heavy pants as he chased me, cupping his mouth, screeching animal calls. I knew his vacant eyes, his animalistic sea-hitters, the leader of the pack. The force of the memory slamming into me almost sent me crumbling to my knees. I wasn't in the office anymore. I was nose, running. The ground was uneven beneath my feet. I staggered over grass up to my knees, dropping into a crawl, forcing my way through the dirt. Above me, through a thick canopy of trees, the sun was already setting, lunging into a sprint. Branches smacked into my face, my mouth full of rust. Everything hurt. "Matilda?" My boss's voice danced in the back of my skull, but all I could feel was pain. Pain that sent me to my knees, grasping my hair and pulling it from my scalp. This time, I was laughing, sprinting through trees after a retreating figure. I lunged, hitting water, throwing myself onto them. Shears thundered in my ears, slicing her throat easily. I severed her head, giggling manically to myself. "Matilda has done it again." A voice screamed. "If she beats our king, you have yourself a queen." "Meat." The word suffocated my throat. I stripped the girl's flesh, fashioning her skull into a crown I balanced on my head. Meat. Stuffing her entrails into my mouth. I faced my audience, my adoring fans. They were ants. Ants I wanted to squash, and pick apart, and pull their wriggling guts to their bodies. Ants. "Matilda." Blinking rapidly, I was back in the office. My boss stood in front of me, waving his hand to my face. Behind me, Casper's eyes were glued to me. He pulled a stringy piece of chicken from his teeth, dangling it teasingly, his smile growing, revealing spiky incisors. "Are you okay?" my boss asked, wide-eyed. I didn't realize I dropped my coffee mug, slicing my finger on the shattered pieces. "Yeah?" Sticking my bloody finger in my mouth. Pleasure exploded in my throat, hunger slamming into me. I could sense my smile growing wider, stretching across my face. "Ants. Great." My boss invited me to speak to him at lunch. I knocked on his office door. His response was a gruff laugh. "I know you are awake," he snapped when I stepped inside. I blinked. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't know what you're talking about." He rolled his eyes. "Oh, give it up." The other kid tried to hide it too. "It's exhausting. I can quite literally see the cognitive awareness in your eyes. It's actually quite disappointing your juvenile consciousness has caught up." His lip curled. "Matilda, I was hoping your cut would last longer. You are an exceptional worker." He activated a screen projected across the wall. On it, Zach, covered in blood. His eyes were wild and vacant, penetrating the camera. The screen flickered off. "Now, how were we supposed to know that removing vital parts of your brain would cause these kinds of side effects?" It was fascinating. Truly fascinating. Children turned animals. He grinned. "Now look at you." He nodded to the door. The other kid, too. Perfectly reformed. And, ironically and monically, Exactly what you were supposed to be in the first place. Now, isn't that wonderful? Hmm? Happy endings all around. Now, Matilda, you can either go back to your job, or, he turned to the screen displaying my brother, back to the playpen. My response was quick and clinical, wearing a smile. Work, of course, I said. I work for the Future Work Initiative. I grabbed his hand, shaking it. His heart was pounding. He was scared of me. Disgusted. Yes, terrified. I had only one thought. Find Zach. I'd really like to work here, sir, I gushed. As part of the Future Work Initiative. He let go like I was diseased. Jeez, they really did a number on you kids. Huh? He jerked his head toward the door. Get the fuck out of my office. In 3 strides. I did, walking directly into a grinning Casper. Maddie? His grotesque smile revealed raw bacon fat caught between his teeth. He stepped towards me, his scent already overpowering. You know what they are, Casper said, closing in on me. You know what they did to us. To Zach. His voice broke, but I didn't believe it. What they made us do, and what they turned us into. His expression was so far gone and human. Unblinking, lips breaking into an animalistic grin. I couldn't call him the boy I grew up with. I want you to fucking say it. Maddie. I didn't say it. I pushed past him, and I kept walking, towards an elevator with no buttons. Only one way. Up. Casper joined me, arms folded, still grinning like he knew something I didn't. Back to work. To the Future Work Initiative. Back to the ants.